Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm delighted to be here today with author Ellen Michaelson. Welcome.
Hello, good morning. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. Ellen Michaelson is a physician in Portland, Oregon, and an MFA graduate from Pacific University. She is an assistant professor of medicine at Oregon Health and Science University and vice president of the board of the Northwest Narrative Medicine Collaborative. Her work has appeared in creative nonfiction, Portland Monthly, Women in Solitude from SUNY Press, and Literature and Medicine. The Care of Strangers, the book we're going to talk about today, and I know you have a copy of it handy, is her first book. And so we are going to talk about this beautiful book today. Thank you. Please tell me about The Care of Strangers.
Okay, well, The Care of Strangers is a story about how we take care of each other in challenging times. And then it's set in the late 80s, and it touches on a lot of relevant issues. It's the immigrant experience. It talks about mother-daughter relationship and moving beyond family expectations, which is the biggest problem of the main character, and breaking away from that hospital hierarchy, and the main character's place in that, and female relationships at work, to unlikely people who get to know each other, an orderly and an intern. But it can happen. I met somebody afterwards that was a medical student who had been an orderly, and I think Abraham Verghese was an orderly at some point in time. And then a big part of it is also about outsiderness. Um, and, and the main character, Seema, is an immigrant. She's an orderly. She's experienced anti-Semitism and racism, and so it's really. And the other character is Mindy, is a young intern. She's also kind of an outsider, and she's a psych rotator. I probably am telling you too much now, but a psych rotator, which most people don't know what that means. But as an intern in psychiatry, you have to do a year of medicine first, and that means you have to rotate through all the different areas and be a real medical doctor before you just go and listen to people's stories all the time. And those people who want to become psychiatrists, people choose things for different reasons, but they're not as often as comfortable with some of the physicality, and they're happier to sit and think and talk than to do physical stuff. So that makes her an outsider, just by definition. So that's in a nutshell. That's what covers a lot of territory.
Yes, indeed. And I think it covers a lot of territory. And you said that the book is set in the 80s, but all of these are really contemporary questions. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
just from your first line, like, how do we take care of each other in challenging times? We're recording this in, the end of
yeah,
June
I
2021,
know.
as we're coming
Yeah,
out of the pandemic. And,
yeah,
and so those questions, as well as questions of race and racism, immigrants, all of these questions, I think certainly, were pertinent in the 80s and are also incredibly current today as
yeah.
well.
I
So go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I was surprised. A couple of people asked, like, did you know this was going to be so? I mean, who knew it was going to be so relevant? But it turns out this is like probably the perfect time. Though coming out in a pandemic's not so fun, but the perfect time for all of these things, because they're obviously still very relevant today. We haven't solved most of these things, and that's kind of sad, but it
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Yeah. Why were you drawn to tell this story?
yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about. I wanted to explore the inside of this world and the intimacy that exists between. I certainly experienced myself and still do my intimacy with myself and with patients, but there's also intimacy with other people, between the patient and the doctor, the patient and the nurse, patients and orderlies and other hospital workers. And I really wanted to let people know what this world was like. This world was not a world that I had had any real exposure to. I think I had one brief short stint as a medical student in an inner city hospital when I was in medical school, but it's a totally different world and totally different population than I had ever been connected with. So it was always a love-hate relationship when I was on call, because it's very, very tough to be on call. You're exhausted and you're working very hard, but but other times I really loved it. I really loved being part of it.
Hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us the richness of your experience, for telling the story. What do you hope that readers will take away from it?
Well, I think what I think important to take away from it is that we can reach out to each other. You know, you don't have to know somebody really well to connect with them. And if you also we've all had difficult times, and every people have had various levels of difficult times. But if you can reach something in yourself, and not to say that you are just like someone else, but you can find some sore spot in yourself to reach out with empathy to connect with another human being. And I think that's probably the biggest take home. I think would be good for people to gather that. And in this time and through the politics that we've gone through, I mean, there's still certain people who did certain things in their voting that I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to talk to that person. But that's not really going to get us very far, to say I'm not going to talk to anybody. It's like Congress can't work across the aisles. We have to be able to work across the aisles, and we have to figure out how to do it. And we can work on it in our personal life. Maybe we can do it in a bigger realm.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful hope and a beautiful wish. I think fiction is such a wonderful way to do that, because it's a really safe space to explore, the experiences of others, the reactions of others, how we can relate to others who are really different from us, how we can visit worlds that we might never see in other ways,
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
yeah, so thank you. Thank you for offering us that journey and that kind of almost behind the scenes portrait of a very busy hospital, a very busy urban hospital, and set in Brooklyn, in the 80s. And so you get this whole world too that is also, kind of in the past. So thank you for giving us that opportunity.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I heard, as I was researching for this interview, I read that the Care of Strangers had a very long journey from the
Hmm.
first idea that like it popped into your brain or into your body, until it became the award-winning book
Award-winning
that it
book.
is today, which
Yeah,
is so
yeah,
congratulations.
yeah,
Can you
yeah.
tell me a little bit more about that journey and how
That
you
journey.
stayed
Yeah.
resilient?
Yeah, well, I never aimed to write a novel. You know, I wanted to write short stories. I wanted to write like Amy Hempel. Sure, you know who she is. And I've never, even still to this day, totally understand what Amy Hempel does or how she does it. But then, when I was in this workshop and you'd start writing things, people say, "Oh, that sounds like the N word. It's a novel. It's bigger than a story." And I started writing. I started making lists of quirky patient episodes of things that happen. And then I would write for 3 months, and I just write these little episodes. And I really had no idea what I was doing. And then well, I ran out of material. Let's make another list. And I really had no concept of, okay, I knew things had to happen, but there has to be a through line, not just in one chapter, and things have to be connected. And initially the intern, Mindy Kahn, didn't have a name. She was called Intern. And I was, the orderly was, it started, she was just watching her and following her around in the hospital. And so, over time I had to learn what to do with all that. So I finished a first draft in this workshop that I had been with somebody named Tom Spanbauer, who was my first mentor and called me a writer and changed my name, changed my life. And I moved to Oregon to work with him because he moved out here. And but when I finished that, I knew that it wasn't there yet for sure. And so I needed to learn some things that I couldn't learn with Tom and in our group there. And I decided to do an MFA, and I'm probably shrinking the time because it's over a long time. So I worked on it. My second thesis advisor wanted me. She said, she thought my character, that Seema, was a little almost unreliable. She was a little too, zipped up. And why don't I try third person? So that's when I switched to third person. And Seema changed a lot. She became somebody who was quieter, more empathetic, more competent. People saw her as competent. She wasn't in everybody's face all the time, which is what she was in first person. And so that really changed. And so I worked on the first half of it, because nobody would read the whole thing, although I think my thesis advisor did. My thesis advisor, her name was Bonnie Jo Campbell, who has written wonderful books. And she So we went through the first half of it, and then she turned me over to her, to an editor she had worked with, a private editor, to go through the rest of the book, and then I started sending it out, to places. And but I was, I entered some contests. I listened to some young person who I shouldn't have. I was younger then, but I didn't want to take 20 million years to read this book, but of course I did anyway. So she said, oh, don't send it. I was going to send it out to agents and contests and everything all at once. She said, oh, well, agents like to think they're the first person who's seen it. And so I went for some contests first, and I was a finalist or semifinalist in about half a dozen contests. And I thought, well, that's nice, but it's still not a contract. So then I did the agent thing, and I had a similar kind of thing. I got, there were about half a dozen agents who they really liked the material. Nobody ever questioned the authenticity. They liked the writing, but they weren't quite the true story, and they weren't quite as connected with Seema to feel like, I don't love this. I'm not falling in love with it. That's the language they use. So, and then I spent the next 2 months really only, being really ruthless and putting more stuff in. And I really paid attention to stuff that I hadn't wanted to do, like structure. For some reason, I didn't want to know anything about structure, but you can't really write a novel without structure. And it's more than just about the beginning and the end of a little section, which I knew I had that in every chapter, but still. So I really was, I had part one, part two, part three. I looked at each chapter to see, I moved a few things around a little bit, and then I just did it. And then that I really needed to do some stuff that I had struggled to do, because I started writing in minimalist styles. Just let Seema say stuff, just let her say it and let it come out. And so I had just a few little some chapters that were just like really short, and Seema would just say it. And then I felt like, okay, it's probably not perfect, but this is good now. This is going to do it. So I thought, I hoped. And apparently I had this contest thing on my computer. I don't know where I saw it or whatever, but I thought, oh, okay, I entered to another few contests, and including the Miami Book Fair one. And I thought, well, Justin Torres is he was a New Yorker, he's an immigrant, and that this would be, or his family was, and he would be a good person for this book. And it turned out he was a good person for this book. He was great. And then I got a call from Claudette de Groot. They're the people who sponsored the contest in Miami, and she was kind of funny, because she called me. She left a message, called me late at night on a Sunday night, and I was doing something, and I listened to the message. And I thought, oh, this sounds important. This sounds good. She said she wanted to talk to me in the morning. She's on the East Coast, and I just emailed her back and said, I sent her an email. I said, just, I'm in the West Coast, so, please don't call me till like 8:30 or whatever. I thought, so I'd be awake, and, and I'd be able to have a reasonable conversation. And then she said that she really, oh, I wanted to let you know that you were one of the finalists for this contest. And I said, oh, and I thought, oh, finalists again. Okay, whatever. And then I said, but she's calling me, so, and then she said, and then I want to let you know that you are chosen as the winner of this contest. This is how she told me. She dragged it out over like 10 minutes. But it was like, I said, oh my God. I think I was sitting in bed and I had to like get up, and it was like, oh wow, this is very cool. And so it was, and with it came a contract with Melville House to publish the book. So that's the story.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
I never really gave up on the story. I mean, I worked on other things, but I knew the material was good. I enjoyed the material, and every time I was working with it, I was expanding it and learning more and going deeper with it. So I was never bored. That's not true of all sorts of things, but I also tried to take more recently about my little piece that I published in creative nonfiction, which was also a contest. And looking back, I had submitted it to 30 places before it got accepted. But I always believed in that story, and every time it came back, I knew it wasn't quite right, and I just took it back and worked it again and sent it out again. And so, it's a little easier with 1,500 words to do that, to wrap your head around it. With a novel, it's quite a bit harder. But I just kept trying to say to myself, okay, I never really gave up. I got discouraged a little occasionally, but every year I would get something would happen that would encourage me that my writing was going in the right direction, and I was getting support for it. It wasn't quite there yet, but I just felt like, well, all these people are saying these good things, not quite there, so I'm just going to keep going. And those are the things that really kept me going to keep on with it.
Excellent. I'm glad you had such a supportive community and so much resilience. I'm grateful that all of that resilience has turned into the care of strangers, being out in the world. So thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for sticking with
yeah,
it. Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so for my last question, the Care of Strangers just does a beautiful job of kind of braiding together like the world of medicine, the world of a hospital, all of the people in it with, yes, this beautiful language, this like very empathetic perspective, which I think is also a bridge to, the double hats, the many hats that you wear as a
Hmm.
physician and
Hmm.
also as part of the Northwest Narrative Medicine Collaborative and as
Hmm.
a writer and reader. And
Hmm.
so as someone who's married to a nurse, so I get that perspective of like, what it's like to be in the hospital and trying to like give really personal care to your patients. He's talked about like how that blend between personal connection and his own process as a caregiver with also needing to keep some professional boundaries to perform the job well. And so
Hmm.
there's like both that like a little bit of distance, which is so different from reading and writing where you really
Yeah,
you have no distance, like
yeah.
especially as a reader, especially as a writer, you really have to inhabit the characters, and that's part of the fun of it. So I was hoping we could close and just talk a little bit more about how like you either thread that needle or how they complement each other.
Yeah. Well, I've had for a while, and then I shifted a little bit just more recently. I had a narrative medicine practice, what I call is people really want to they really want to be heard, and they want to be seen as human beings. And narrative medicine is is trying to absorb people's stories in order to connect with them, to really be motivated to go the extra mile. And it's it's not that, certainly as doctors and professionals we're motivated, should be motivated to do our job, but to be connected to people. And we were taught way back when about, like you said, all the professionalism and distance and all that, and to some degree that's relevant. You can't become best friends with all of your patients. But now I've been working with people. Now I have patients who I've known for 15 plus years, which I didn't before. And it does help you to connect. And you don't you I was going to say something about the empathy part. I mean, you have to listen to people. And so that's what I try to do is listen to people's stories and understand why it's important to listen to people's stories. Like, for example, a friend of mine, she wrote another book. It's a nonfiction book about working with patients, and she gave the example of this older elderly woman with who had swelling in her feet. She had congestive heart failure, and she needed to wear support hose and to help with the swelling. And she didn't want to wear the support hose, and she didn't want to do X, Y, and Z. And so finally, somehow my friend who's a physician talked to her and found out what was important to this woman. What was important is she wanted to go to her granddaughter's graduation in a couple of months. And so we said, okay, let's focus on that. And her daughter came up with the idea uh, of of dyeing the support hose a nice color to match her favorite dress. So she did that. And then instead of, the doctor's always busy looking at, we're looking at the potassium and the chloride and all the numbers, and we're giving people diuretics, but watching, got to make sure they don't get, dehydrated and all this kind of stuff. But the patient doesn't care about that. The patient doesn't really understand that stuff. That's our job. So wearing this support hose got her to then take the medication the way she was supposed to, so she could get her legs, the swelling down, and she could go to her granddaughter's graduation. So it is time consuming, a little time consuming, but it's not that time consuming. It just take a little bit of tweak. I learned a strange lesson it's a good lesson, but a lesson from a surgeon of all people when I first moved to Oregon, and I worked in the Dalles, which that's kind of like a little community of 10,000 people. After working in Harlem, it was quite a bit different. And he said, what people really want from you, because we shared a patient in common, and he took me out to lunch. He said, patients really want to they really want to know something. They really want to know something about you, and you really have to and remember something about them. So that's what I was going to say before. When I moved from New York, I was chatty by New York standards, but by Oregon standards, I was not. And when I moved to the Dalles, people really wanted to know, who was this woman? I was like Northern exposure, Jewish woman from the East Coast working in the Dalles. What's this all about? And they really wanted to know about me. And so I started talking more about myself a little bit. And then also I would, in the surgeon had said, well, put a few little notes in the side to remember certain things about patients. And I started to do that too. And that was a really useful thing to really, so when you see the person the next time, you say, oh, how is so and so, or you connect with them, and that they know that you remember them and that you're a human being. You're not just the next person with congestive heart failure or diabetes who won't take his or her meds, and that it really helps. So this is what we aim for, and also in narrative medicine to create a support system for us, for the caregivers too. We have a little commercial, but we have a monthly session that's been on Zoom very successfully since the beginning of COVID, called the Community of Practice, and we meet. I think it's the third Tuesday of every month, from 6 to 8 on Zoom, and we talk. We start with a little piece of writing, something from fiction or poetry, or sometimes it's visual art, and then we write about it, and then we share it. We talk about it and we share it, and so we help each other, support each other in this world that's still a little tougher than we might like it to be sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so very much for taking the time to connect with your patients as a physician. Thank you for taking the time to connect with readers and, kind of to the wider world through the process of writing and sharing the care of strangers. And thank you for talking to me and connecting with me
Oh,
today. Ellen
it's been
Michaelson, this
wonderful.
has been such a pleasure. Thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.